People move organizations. Welcome to People Move Organizations, the podcast that gives you 10 minutes per week dedicated to your personal development of core business skills. I'm Rachel, and I believe that every employee, regardless of title or position, makes a difference in their organization. And that's why I coach teams to become high-performing, productive, and engaged by focusing on the full team, not just the leadership. Today's topic is a previous episode on building intuition using the decision-primed recognition framework, and it's a great follow-up to last week's episode on the difference between soft and hard skills. But before we get into that, I'd like to encourage you to subscribe to the podcast so that you get each new episode each Monday. We're available on all the major podcast apps, and while you're there, please rate and review us so that others can find us. And you can help promote the podcast while also getting a bit of networking done this week. Just go to our LinkedIn page, PMO Coaching, and find one of our posts that you think your network would benefit from and hit share. And I'd love to come to your next team meeting and take a deeper dive into one of the topics that we cover here on People Move Organizations. Let me spend some time with your team, helping you become more productive, more skilled, and more engaged in a topic like we're going to cover today. And so, on to a throwback episode. I hope you enjoy. You know how the military has those exercises where the soldiers go into a fake building or fake city and have to shoot the bad guys, but not shoot the little old lady? What they're doing is practicing building their intuition. They practice over and over, learning to trust their intuition to lead them to react more accurately about when to pull the trigger and when not to. I would guess that if you were able to ask one of the soldiers what they were thinking when they were walking through that fake city, they'd tell you that they really weren't thinking. They're relying on their intuition. These professions, where your intuition could mean the difference between life or death, embrace the idea that intuition is a skill that can be built. They take it seriously and they dedicate time to practice and improving. Now, it isn't life or death for those of us who work in the business world, but I'm not sure why we don't take it just as seriously. You can improve your intuition by learning how to spot the clues in a situation that lead to a certain pattern of action that result in your response. If your response turns out to be not successful, or not as successful as it could be, then you need to learn from the situation. This system is called recognition primed decision. You're in a situation that generates clues, that let you recognize a pattern, that activate action scripts, that ultimately impact the situation. Let's go back to our military example. If you've got a soldier making his way through a fake city trying to clear a path for his platoon, that's the situation. He wants to only shoot the bad guys. What are the clues that he uses to almost instantly distinguish a bad guy from an innocent bystander? Now, I'm not from a military background, so bear with me here as I make some statements that are primarily based on what I've learned from TV dramas. An innocent bystander is going to be walking down the middle of the sidewalk, not crouched up against the wall using it as cover. So, as you turn the corner, your intuition tells you not to shoot at the person out in the open. But a soldier has to learn this through practice because your body's natural fight or flight response will have you pulling the trigger before you can recognize that the person standing in front of you is a little old lady. So how do you apply this system recognition primed decision framework in the business world when you aren't facing life or death situations? As part of your job, you have a set of situations that you face regularly. If you're in sales, you're regularly in a situation where you're in front of a prospective client trying to convince them to buy from you. If you're a project manager, you're regularly in a situation where the timeline for the project is going to have to be extended. If you're a nurse, you're regularly in a situation where the symptoms a patient is showing doesn't add up to a perfect diagnosis. Each job has a set of decision requirements. The intuitions, judgments, and skills that you must master in order to be able to reliably perform your job. In order to improve, there are some things you can do. First, you have to identify and understand the decision requirements that are part of your job. What makes those decisions difficult? What are some of the common errors? How does someone in your same job with more experience make those same decisions? Next, you have to practice making the decisions in context. This is a thought experiment. Think back to a situation you were in. What were the clues that you picked up on, and what were the ones you missed? Because you now have hindsight to see what went right and what went wrong, you should be able to see the clues that you didn't see at the time. You can also practice with a coworker who is in the same situation with you. Ask them to describe the clues that they saw and which ones were different from the ones that you saw. Since you were in the same situation, it's interesting to see how the different people had a different take on it. Finally, analyze your decision steps to determine what you might do differently the next time. Let me give you an example. I'm working with a project manager who is early in his career. He recently had a project kickoff meeting, and he felt it didn't go as well as it could have, and asked me to review the recording and help him see where he could have done something differently. At the start of the meeting, there was a good engagement. The client was asking questions, making comments, and generally had a really energetic demeanor. The meeting was progressing nicely, but then at some point it started to change. The client was asking fewer questions. His responses to questions were, uh-huh, and yeah. My spidey sense was really high at this point. The change meant something was going wrong with the meeting. There was no obvious reason. The project manager continued on as if nothing had changed. I would have started to ask questions like, sounds like maybe something isn't sitting well with you. Is there something we need to go back to and address? This change in behavior meant that something was wrong, but it just wasn't clear what it was. Finally, after several more minutes of the meeting, the client said, you know what, I've had something come up that's urgent and I really need to address it, so I'm going to need to end this call. What do we need to do for the next steps? And there it was. He didn't have any questions or concerns about this project. He had been completely distracted by some other issue. But because the PM hadn't picked up on the clues, he hadn't given the client the chance to recognize these competing priorities and end the call before spending a lot more time on this project, which frankly the client's not going to remember because he was distracted. The minute this urgent issue showed up on his doorstep, his attention shifted, and everything the PM covered after that point was likely not going to stick. If we go back to the recognition prime decision framework, the situation was a meeting where a change in behavior created a cue that something had changed. Our project manager didn't have an action script for this. His job was to conduct a kickoff meeting to cover a certain list of topics in an hour. He was focused on that, and he didn't recognize the clue to execute a different action script when that pattern changed. But you can bet your bottom dollar that he'll notice a behavior change in the future and be able to take action. You may be wondering why intuition is important. Why build this skill? We live in a world where analysis gets most of the attention. Both of these skills are important. Being able to analyze a situation using cold hard facts is necessary, and if you aren't able to do that in the business world, you're not going to succeed. But there is a balance between relying solely on data and using your intuition to decide on the right course of action. Think of analysis as being focus, looking at what is in front of you and seeing it clearly. Intuition is the peripheral vision. It's not in focus, but it helps you orient yourself to the situation. Our project manager was focused on his agenda and his objectives. His peripheral vision was missing. It does no good to get through an agenda if the client is distracted and not paying attention. And our soldiers focus on the person in front of him, and his peripheral vision tells him that the threat does not exist because the person is standing in the middle of the street, not crouched up against the wall. So, as you go through your week this week, think about what your recognition primed framework looks like. What are the common situations you find yourself in your job? How can you start to practice the set of decision requirements that are important for your job? And where are there opportunities for you to find a better balance between analysis and tuition? So that's it for this week. Thank you so much for your support of the podcast. We're here to help you build your core business skills each week, little by little. And we hope that you're getting something out of People Move Organizations. If you are, we ask that you tell your friends and coworkers about us and make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast so that you get each new episode each week. You know, we only grow through word of mouth. And telling your friends and coworkers, or even your HR department, if maybe your company is not a big enough size that you have a training department dedicated to helping you build your core business skills. Thank you so much. Until next week.